Further debate? I recognize the member from Oshawa.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I am very pleased to be able to stand and speak to an education bill. Someone who was a former teacher, you don't ever stop wanting to stand up and defend public education. So here I am with Bill 101, which is called the Putting Student Achievement First Act. Schnazzy title, unfortunately it leaves a lot to be desired. But what I imagine people think is in this bill is anything to support students, anything to encourage their achievement, or to give them the resources or tools that are so desperately needed. And unfortunately, spoiler alert, they won't find that in this bill. Nothing in this bill will improve outcomes for students or ensure that they have the smaller class sizes that we know that they need. Special education, mental health supports, absent from this bill. Even basic resources like consumables, pencils, things like that, that is not in this bill. Rather than putting student achievement first, this bill is about putting the Minister of Education and his opinions first. This bill vastly expands the control and powers of this Minister of Education or the next Minister of Education. It creates a new layer of bureaucracy, limits the advocacy and support that parents receive, and in addition to giving the minister more power, it seems designed to discourage good people from running for trustee. And the minister has already said he'll appoint people where there are no trustees elected. I want to say thank you at the outset of this debate to the trustees in Durham Region who have put their names forward, who make themselves available to parents, who are waging an uphill battle, because through the years, trustees have indeed lost a lot of their ability to fix problems because we have such underfunded and under-resourced schools. Unfortunately, this bill further disrespects them. Now, it doesn't eradicate them or get rid of them, which is what we were possibly anticipating. People are very nervous about that. There's been a bit of a walk back, but there's some interesting language in here that still takes away a lot of their ability, certainly to have free conversations with community. So I'll come back to that later. The bill mentions liability, or the word liable, 43 times. And it mentions the word students 5 times. In classrooms, it does not. So I'm interested in why the minister is so focused on his priorities, his opinions, and giving himself and his supervisors immunity, and spends so little focus on actual student achievement and supporting them so that they can actually reach for better. Speaker, this government is more focused on controlling classrooms than improving them. This Premier is doing nothing to address the staffing crisis that is hurting students every day. Families are already paying more out of pocket because of cuts. This bill does not offer any relief. And centralizing control is not going to put more supports into the classrooms. Bill 101 ignores the crisis in school infrastructure. We've heard about schools that have crumbling infrastructure, and there are some great and shiny new schools out there. We hear about the challenges of no air conditioning in the summer, of cold classrooms and portables. If you have, you have, and if you have not, you have not in the province of Ontario. And education is supposed to be the great equalizer. Where is the money? Where is the investment in education that will ensure that every child has a clear path forward? Speaker, I'm very proud to be standing here as a member of the Ontario New Democratic Party. We have always stood up for strong, well-funded public education and services. We would be investing in classrooms and putting students and their education at the centre of education. And that means hiring more teachers and education workers. That would mean reducing class sizes, fixing crumbling infrastructure where we find it, making decisions in partnership with parents, educators, and communities so that every student has the support that they need to succeed. So where is this coming from? Because anyone you talk to, whether they have a child in the education system, whether they love a kid, if it's a grandchild, whether it's a neighbor, or maybe they don't have a young person or an educator connected to the system, you'd have to be living under a rock in this province to not know how strapped the system is and just how challenged it is. So we would expect to see an education bill, especially one that talks about student achievement, to come forward and prioritize those kids and their learning, and that is not what we have here. So where is this bill that mentions liability 43 times and students 5 times? Where does this bill come from? This seems to be a control wish list of this particular minister. This is a bill that has 57 clauses, and only one is about student achievement. That's the reality of this bill, and the folks at home can look it up, flip through it, do the word search or whatever, and see that this is not about students and learning. There's nothing to support struggling students in this bill. This is a bill that gives the minister increased power over schools and boards, including books, grades, exams. Talks a lot about exams, going to bring the hammer down when it comes to exams. It reduces the power of trustees and school boards and the English language boards, public and Catholic, to represent their communities. It gives the power to a new business-oriented chief executive officer who can overrule democratically elected and accountable trustees. There's been a lot of that going around lately with the last few bills, the overruling of democratically elected folks, but more on that another time. Speaker, the government plans to limit the number and scope of school board trustees in favour of creating CEO and chief of education roles. So this changes school board bargaining for English boards. It takes it away from trustee associations, hands it to the Council of Ontario Directors of Education, and that will now be made up by the new CEOs. Total overhaul. And this wasn't asked for by the parents, by the educators who are clamoring for support for a partner in this government. This government has talked about, and this minister also is focused on attendance. I will say right now, we all want students to be able to go to school, and we want them to be successful. But I will say, as somebody who spent a lot of years in a classroom, there are a lot of exceptionalities, and we need kids to have the support that they need to be able to succeed. So when we have thousands of kids in the province of Ontario who are told, whose parents are told, they got to stay home today, they cannot come this afternoon, can you keep them home until next week, we don't have an EA. And anybody who's saying that that isn't happening or whatever I just heard over there, really, yes, really. Parents are getting the calls in the morning from the school saying, you don't have an EA today, you can't send your kid to school. So if we're going to focus on attendance, let's focus on getting them to be able to attend. If it's a busing challenge or a barrier like that, logistic barrier, let's solve it. For goodness sakes, we can identify it. People tell us every day. Students who are not allowed to attend and are told to stay home because there aren't resources or supports in the schools deserve to be in schools. They deserve to attend. Make sure that they can. And kids with barriers or busing issues, cuts to their classrooms that they used to have behavioral intervention programs, fund the resources and the pathways so that all students can indeed attend. Measure that. Speaker, by restricting trustees in their voice, this minister is restricting the voice of families of children with disabilities. Oftentimes, the parents who are so frustrated because their kids don't have what they need, they turn to the trustees, and it is an uphill battle. I think we all know that. All of us know that the trustees in our community who are trying to fix and solve cannot do it when the system is so underfunded. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, their comments on this, they are rejecting the provincial government's proposed education bill because it unnecessarily and restructures school board governance and leadership roles. It limits the core responsibilities of trustees and unilaterally interferes with central and local bargaining. It's a big deal. The Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation has raised concerns about this bill. Instead of fixing the real issues, the government is replacing directors of education with CEOs who may have no background in education. This move it signals a troubling corporatization of public education at a time when it would be expected to lead central bargaining. Collective bargaining in Ontario's education sector relies on long-established processes and a deep understanding of how schools operate. And removing that expertise risks undermining stability and trust at the table rather than strengthening it. We've heard from several education unions and professional associations who are concerned about this bill and its impacts. And I would love to know what evidence the minister has, like what did he collect to support the decisions to limit the power of those trustees and school boards. Speaker, there's nothing in this bill about smaller class sizes or more resources. I want to tell you something that's my experience. I can't speak for all teachers in all classrooms, but I taught in South Oshawa. I taught in a few places, but South Oshawa right up until I was elected, at a school that had great kids, but concentrated need in that area. Low-income housing, a lot of different challenges that do tend to concentrate in some of these areas in our communities. They were kids who didn't have Wi-Fi at home. Their parents or their family couldn't afford consistent Wi-Fi. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. So they'd go to Tim Hortons, but they could only stay so long because they didn't have money to buy stuff. So they'd go to the public library, and they used to have the Wi-Fi on after hours, but then they realized that the kids were gathering outside and it was a safety issue, so they'd shut off the Wi-Fi. And so I had a kid in my class who wanted to do the assignment, wrote his assignment on his phone, but they don't have data, didn't have money for a data plan, couldn't send it to me, and whatever the security things were, I couldn't download it from his phone or upload it or whatever. I had to take pictures from my phone of his screen to be able to have something that I could mark. Otherwise, he could write it. But this was a kid who wanted to have it digital, right? Wanted to participate with the other kids. That was the reality in my school. And we had one laptop cart. Okay, this was years ago. I've been here 12 years, so give or take about that time. We had one laptop cart. And I taught the 7-8 class in the morning, and I did literacy with them, and then I taught a different 7-8 class and did all the literacy and social studies in the afternoon. The afternoon class, we had access to the laptop cart. In the morning, only the primaries did. So my grade 7s and 8s, kids getting ready for high school, never once had access to laptops in that school. I had 3 or 4 computers in my classroom that we fought over. They learned a lot. I did really well, but that's the reality, right? So, yeah, you can give teachers a $750 card, and everyone's going to say thank you. They want to be able to buy things for their kids, but the board needs the money to be able to invest in actual learning resources. This isn't about making teachers happy that they can finally buy pencils. I would have used it to buy art supplies. I used to buy the expensive art supplies, cut them in half, share them with the kids, because those are kids who were never going to have access to those supplies. This isn't about pencils or about art supplies. This is about fundamental fairness for every kid in the province of Ontario to have a clear path to achievement. And there isn't anything in this bill that is going to make sure that every kid has that clear path. This government needs to invest in education. This minister wants to bring the hammer down, but clearly he does not understand that sometimes you have to lift people up, that there are kids who are never going to get a fair shot, especially if we limit their access to education. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer. We were talking earlier about Animal Farm. You know, all animals are created equal, but some more equal than others, right? Poor kids in South Oshawa, not as equal as others. And nothing in this bill will ensure that every kid can look forward to a bright future. Speaker, if you never invest in education, this minister, they can't just boss their way into positive outcomes. You have to support students, educators, and our public education system. That is how our province gets brighter. That is how our future gets better. That is how our students actually can achieve. So what I would like to see from this government is investment in our kids, investment in our educators, investment in small classes, in better outcomes and clear pathways. Speaker, when it comes to racism in our schools, where is that in this bill? If I only have a few minutes left, I want to say that the Dreams Delayed report came out in March of 2025. It's been over a year, confirmed systemic racism in our schools. It gave us a roadmap and ready-to-use recommendations, but nothing has been done. The minister said he'd review it, but we don't see that in this bill. We haven't heard that in this room. I want to hold this government accountable to the people of this province who are asking them to do better, who are asking them to invest in our kids, to invest in education and the future of this province. Thank you, Speaker.